Jeff, how are you?
Good morning, Fergal. How are you?
Good, thanks. Well, I suppose it would be rude not to introduce ourselves a little bit, Jeff. What do you think? Do you want to go first and kind of give a quick context as to who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. Exactly. So, Jeff
It's a great
DeLelio,
question.
yeah, exactly. Jeff DeLelio, I'm a principal enterprise solution architect with VMware by Broadcom. I've been because we're talking proposals here, I've worked on proposals for over 30 plus years, and certainly involved in the AI side of the product development over at VMware as well. So, happy to support you on this call.
Brilliant and great as ever, syncing up as well, Jeff. So my name is Fergal McGovern. I'm the founder and CEO of Visible Thread. For my sins, I often joke I've been around this space for about 15 years, plus or minus, building products, working with 11 of the top 15 US government contractors, and being affiliated with APMP. My first APMP event was actually in 2011, which is quite some time back. But I guess suffice to say, we have been serving products to people in the world of proposals as well as capture and contracts for quite some time. And we're also really, we've got the pleasure and privilege of having a front seat view to AI and how that's going as well. So I hope you take something from this presentation. I hope you find it useful. Our ambition is not really to kind of shove product down your throat. That is not really interesting. What we really want to do here is actually talk about AI, how it can help, and equally how it can't help. And that's really important. And before we go forward, I just want to say our view, and I don't know if you agree with this, Jeff, is that nobody's job is getting lost here. AI is a tool. It's a very helpful tool for certain jobs, and it can really help in profound ways. But equally, it is not a silver bullet. It is not the thing that was going to, magically do your laundry or make, world peace on Earth. So just
Yeah,
want to
definitely
put our
agree with
stall
you
in
on
it.
that. Yep, exactly.
Cool. Great stuff. Thanks, Jeff. So look, I'll do my best not to monopolize this. Jeff, keep me straight on this, and we'll kind of, tic-tac as we need. But I just think it's still a little hypey out there. So I want to just explain how Gen AI works. I want to explain when to use Gen AI and equally when not to use it. And really, it's about a technology mix for proposal and capture. So, you'd be forgiven right now for getting all, hot and bothered and kind of worried. Well, how does this impact my career progression? How does it impact a lot of things? So we'll try and demystify a lot of this. And I'll finish out by actually talking a little bit towards Gartner, who are a very prominent analyst in the world of software, probably the top premier analyst. And they've just literally this week, in fact, 2 days ago on the 17th, maybe that's 3 days ago, put out their latest AI hype cycle. And I'm going to talk a little bit towards that and give you a sense for where we're at in that hype cycle from a Gartner standpoint. So let's start with the basics. How does this stuff work? And I'm going to give you a quick quote from a guy called Gary Marcus. I've used this slide a number of times, but it's kind of still absolutely valid. So Gary is a kind of a leading AI thought leader, for want of a better way to put it. But basically how Gen AI works and how large language models, the engine of Gen AI work, is that they generate responses basically in a sequence of words. So they're sampling words and they're using probability to actually give another word back. And that sounds a bit techie, particularly when you're thinking about tokens, but you see that quote on the right. A token, effectively, think about that as a part of a word. So think about it as words. Let's make it very real. When I look at this phrase, the dog chased the fill in the blank, it could be the dog chased the cat. Okay, so a Gen AI engine might complete that phrase and say cat. And that's all LLMs are doing fundamentally. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm trivializing LLMs. I'm not. This is fundamentally the way transformer models work. There isn't a mathematical logic underpinning this. It is a predictive technology. And the word that it gives back is dictated by the data in the model itself. So hopefully that's all clear and all sensible. Why wouldn't I have got the dog chase the car? I mean, that's a question. It's a legitimate question. In my case, I've got a border collie and my dog is busy chasing bees all day long in the back garden. So there's no right or wrong in any of this. It is predicated on the model itself as to what next word you get. And the big innovation that was kind of launched, I suppose, with ChatGPT in November 2022, which is when ChatGPT came out. What they did technically is that they made the predictive nature of the next word much more accurate by expanding what's known technically as a context window. And a context window it's all geeky and techie, but basically the larger the context window, the better the next word prediction will be. Okay, so far so good. That's what you're doing when you're actually chatting with a chatbot. And we'll see some examples of this in a little bit. So when should you use this technology? It's important that you have a context on when you should use it. So let's consider this. There's kind of generative AI, which is on the left, where the answers are going to be variable, the next words are going to be variable, and the model dictates the truth. And so you're really looking at probability to generate these things. And you might have heard this idea of hallucinations. Depending on where you're at and what the model is like, you can get a 25% hallucination factor. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more, maybe there's ways in which you can kind of make the model a little bit more predictive and better quality. But fundamentally, you always have to verify what you get back. And I know this sounds very theoretical, but I want to kind of presage the next bit by actually just defining our core terminology here. Generative AI is predictive. It may not give you factually correct answers. There's another fancy phrase, deterministic software. Pretty much the vast majority of the software on the planet is in this category, which is logic-based. It's 100% accurate, 100% repeatable. And you're applying logic in code to get a result. The benefit of deterministic software is that you don't get hallucinations. But there's a time and a place for deterministic software, and there's a time and a place for generative AI. And let's go to where that time would be. So you have to ask yourself the question when you're looking at generative AI, what characteristic do we need in the output or the result? If we need 100% accurate results, or we need 100% repeatable results. In other words, I ask, and I'll show you this in a moment, I ask Microsoft Word, how many occurrences of a certain phrase are in this file? If that's a variable answer, in other words, today it gives me 10, tomorrow it gives me 12, or maybe it doesn't get it quite right, that's not a good outcome. So accuracy in searching is really important. So if you need 100% accurate results and you need repeatability, or you need to know the logic by which you got the results, then you can't use Gen AI for that particular task. On the other hand, so actually, and these are some examples, again, in our world of being a vendor, things like shredding a doc. I hear a lot of vendors out there saying, hey, we can shred a doc using Gen AI. That is not a guaranteed 100% accurate outcome, because that's not how generative AI works. Checking acronyms, calculating grade level, because that's a mathematical formula. It requires deterministic software. So I know this is a little bit geeky, but it is important just to be aware of this. Jeff, any comments on this so far? I realize I'm monopolizing everything.
No, that's fine. You're spot on the fact that you need to always, if you're going to shred something, you need to make sure that the requirements are exactly the requirements and they're never changing, right? Because then you can't build your scope of your response and how you're going to respond to all those, and you need to know that they haven't changed every time you shred it or look at it. So yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Spot on.
And look, let's kind of go to the positive of this, right? What's the right cases to apply this stuff to? And there's tons of them. But in general, they boil down to kind of creative tasks. And by creative, we basically mean when you're doing, in the world of proposal development, let's say, one of the classic tasks is to create a first draft of a management plan, a first draft of a technical volume, whatever it might be. But it's a draft, and it's prone to hallucinations. So you need to trust but verify this stuff. So you need to use products. If you're using products or whatever approach, using ChatGPT, you need to read what comes back. You need to double check it's the right thing. And then you need to hopefully not spend so much time checking and double checking that you may as well have not used Gen AI in the first case. So there's a balancing act to have or to be applied here. So depending on how the product is designed, it will make it easier or not for you. Good enough, this bottom part is actually an interesting proposition. Let's say I was looking for past performance and I wanted to find my, the top 10 past performance areas where I've actually dealt with cybersecurity, for instance. A good enough result might be within a, plus or minus 10%. I get the top content areas, the top docs where I've actually done this before, the top pursuits where I've done it before. That's a good enough result. So kind of approximate search, and I use that word carefully, approximate search can work well, or Gen AI can do a good job on that. Great. I'm going to give you this example, and this is where I'm going to take my life into my own hands and attempt a little bit of live demoing. So Jeff, bail me out if I need. So
yeah,
I'm going
absolutely.
to attempt to, I found this interesting. I tried this the other day. And in fact, I was talking to Jeff about this example yesterday. So let me just attempt to show you what I was doing. Okay, I'm going to clear this out. Jeff, can you confirm you're still seeing my screen? I hope I'm still sharing.
Yes, I can. Yep.
Great. So let's set the scene. I am sharing my full desktop, so let's pray that I don't get some odd mails popping up. But what I'm showing is Microsoft Word. I'm not a Microsoft Word or Microsoft sales engineer, so forgive me on this. But this is fairly typical of what our customers would do. Now, this one here that I'm looking at, this is the NASA SOUP IDIQ. A lot of people possibly on this call are actively pursuing this. Yet another revision dropped yesterday. So we're putting out some comparison reports around that versus the past revision that dropped a few weeks ago. But this is the one that dropped a few weeks ago. I wasn't aware that the one came out yesterday when I was doing this. And a typical thing to do is to search this document. So Jeff, I might just ask you, what kind of stuff would you typically be looking for in a document like this?
So one of the key areas I would initially look for is anything around cybersecurity.
Okay, so you would kind of probably do this kind of thing, cyber.
Yep.
So let's type in cybersecurity. So we're effectively doing a search here, and the results of the search are showing here. And as we plop down here, again, we're not trying to sell you Microsoft Word. I'm just showing you exactly what you would do, right? So you would probably go through, Jeff, look at cybersecurity. Maybe you look for cloud or,
Yep.
I don't know what else, ISO certification, stuff like that. So effectively, it's a searching result. Let's do something fun here. Let's now kick into Copilot, which, don't forget, is a Microsoft product. And Copilot is a generative AI Microsoft product. So it is living on top of an LLM, a large language model. So what shall we ask this document? Let's try and ask it the same question. So I'm going to say, how many occurrences, of cybersecurity are in this doc? Okay, so that's a fairly reasonable question. Maybe I should just put kind of inverted commas here to help the LLM figure that out a bit. But I'll ask that question. Now, the one thing that I realized yesterday for everybody who's on this call is that Copilot isn't exactly blindingly fast. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, so be prepared to wait. We'll probably be waiting anywhere from 45 seconds to a minute for this thing to pull its stuff together and finalize and do all the stuff it does. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting underneath the covers. What technically it's doing, believe it or not, is it's basically all of this content here is stored in what's known as a vector database. And then it attempts to do that search, but it's a deterministic operation. You see the results on the left. There are 27 occurrences of cybersecurity, and it's now come back. So what does it say to us? The term cybersecurity appears to have been misspelled as, ooh, that's a new one, in your query. Oh, I did misspell it. Indeed, it's right. Quite right. I misspelled it. I searched for the correct term, cybersecurity. That's quite smart. Good. And I found multiple occurrences. Here are some of the sections where it appears. There's a section, don't know what this is about. This is the reference. Oh, I found it in the table of contents. But note what it did not do. It did not give me 27 occurrences, and I can't jump around and find the occurrences. So I'm using an LLM for the wrong task. I'm using it to search where I expect literal searches. In other words, all the occurrences, just like we're getting here. What you're seeing on the left here, under the covers, is deterministic software. There's no AI at play here. It's using pattern matching, which is a type of an ability to search, and it's looking for these things. So I set this all up, again, not because we want to dig into the bowels of Microsoft, but just to really compare and contrast. The LLM and Gen AI is the wrong technology to use for search It's the wrong technology to use for accurate shredding. So anywhere where you need an accurate outcome, that would not be wise to use LLMs. Okay, so let me step back at this point and I'll kind of go to the next little section. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that stays with you. It's funny, I was on a demo actually with a customer who was convinced that Gen AI would solve the world's hunger problems and solve everything. And I guess they had been sold a story by somebody, I'm not sure who. But basically, I just share that with everybody. I hope it helps you get a context and a perspective on this. Like most things in life, there is no silver bullet. So let's look at the technology mix. As you think about proposals and capture, this was some work we did with actually, this approach we've done with a number of customers. And it's quite a good approach, and feel free to use it. And I asked Darby to share the deck when we're done here, so you get this downloadable. But basically, what this is saying is, let's look at it from a task perspective. The first goal that we would have, and I like to look at it from a task perspective, forget technology. What are we trying to do? So this first goal, develop a requirements compliance matrix from a government issued request for proposal. The note here is the quality of this. What does it need to satisfy? What's the actual requirement? So I think, Jeff, you already mentioned, you need to be shredding 100% correctly and accurately, and it needs to be repeatable on the same document, right? So it must be 100% accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I was going to say, not only accurate, but as you said, repeatable, right? Because as the documents change, you need to be able to make sure that you're pulling the same requirements.
Correct.
Making sure things aren't skewed.
100%. So that's an example. So for that particular task, if I was to go off and actually, throw a Gen AI based solution at that, I would really not be in a happy place. I would basically not get great results. What you have to use is you have to use a combination of deterministic and other types of AI. So this is something we'll get to a little bit later, but there's multiple different types of AI. Gen AI just happens to be one that's quite glitzy and quite hypey at the moment. But for instance, in VT Docs, our core kind of reviewing solution, we've been using AI in the form of NLP, natural language processing, for 13 years. So it's AI itself as a space has been around for in excess of 40 years. In fact, this is now dating myself. When I was doing computer science back in the day, in God knows the 80s, we were doing modules on AI because the theory and the underpinnings of this stuff has been around an awful long time. Gen AI has really advanced a certain type of AI dramatically, and that's nothing but good for us all. So we're big fans of Gen AI, but in the right place and for the right job. Assisting in developing a compliance-driven outline, that's a combination. There's bits of Gen AI that can help there for sure, but it's also bits of deterministic stuff. So as you go through this, generating a first draft of proposal sections, that's a slam dunk. When it comes to Gen AI, a first draft of proposal section based on your past performance, based on your data, which is a technique known as RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, where you're combining the large language model with your proprietary data and giving a nice result. That's a phenomenally good usage of Gen AI. But just be a little bit careful about what you're trying to do and start with the job you're trying to get done and then try to map it back to the technology base. Okay, so this is absolutely the wrong task to apply Gen AI to. And what this is showing is VT Docs, which is our core solution to help, in this example, identify collections of terms and phrases. It's almost like what you saw a moment ago where I'm doing Control F in Word, except now I'm doing it a bit on steroids. I'm actually combining multiple different things. In this case, will, shall, must on the top with termination clauses, which might be relevant for a contract manager. And that configurable set of things that I'm searching for are codified into the product. In other words, the product can just run this every time. It gets the exact same results every time, and then we can get it out into Excel every time in a good way, just by clicking buttons. No prompting. It's just an important deterministic task. And getting the result similar to this, that's really important. So our customers don't have time to be grappling with prompts and getting inaccurate results and then trying to wedge the outcome into some kind of Excel spreadsheet. You want to be able to click buttons and get outputs you can use and let the software get out of your way to get on with your job. The right task. This is our product VT Writer. it's a phenomenal product, and it's something that we're very proud of. And I hate to say that. I suppose we should never say we're proud of something, but this is really nice because it's done in a way that doesn't have a high learning curve. So it's your classic kind of, there's prompts, and on the left-hand side, you can kind of parameterize these prompts. You can say, well, I'd like to create the RFI for, X agency, and you parameterize the X agency, etc. And I'll show you this in a moment. But then getting a result, which is generated from the LLM, but then checking the result using deterministic software, which is checking for readability and clarity. So this is a great example. The previous slide generates the outcome, and now every one of these paragraphs we're going to score for grade level, which is a great way to assess the complexity or lack of complexity in any piece of content. So a great example of a mix of a product, deterministic here to accurately calculate things like grade level, and LLM/Gen AI to create and refine the content. So at this point, I thought I might kind of just give you a quick sense of this stuff live. So I might just again switch, and Jeff, bail me out if I manage to screw this one up. Hang on a sec.
I think you'll do fine.
Here we go. Okay, cool. So this is VT Docs. This is a collection of folders. In these folders, we see some documents. So for instance, in the context of Oasis Plus, I'll just have a look at this one. Oasis Plus, well, actually, let me see if there's NASA Soup here, since we were talking about that a moment ago. Here's the NASA Soup one, the drop that came out last week. So, or sorry, excuse me, about 3 weeks ago, the final drop then, and there's amendment since. But basically, this is the type of search that a lot of our customers would do. And NASA Soup, it's about 160 pages in this thing. So I might be looking for things like performance. I might be looking for, things like storage. And I know this kind of stuff, Jeff, I'm guessing is the type of stuff that you would have been looking at quite a bit, right? Performance monitoring, utilization, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Security, actually, there's probably one that's close to your heart.
Yep. Automation, platforms, all that stuff.
Right, right. And of course, the nice thing about this is that this is completely rinse and repeat stuff. So these collections of terms and phrases you can kind of configure and set up within VT Docs. Again, you couldn't do that with Gen AI because it's not what it's designed to do. It just doesn't do this analytical type stuff accurately and 100% every time. So I'm just going to whack this out into Excel. I'm going to basically highlight all the terms. And you'll notice that there's colors against these terms as well. And that can be really useful as a communication device. So when we get an outcome, and again, this is kind of a collection of terms and phrases that would be near and dear to your heart. Many of our customers use different, what we call search dictionaries, which are ways of actually configuring these terms and phrases. This one is a techie one, performance, usability, resiliency. All of this stuff here is every last piece of content shredded out. And as we scroll down, you'll start to see the cross-referencing going on here. And if I even go down, I'll just shoot down quite a bit. Yeah, we see some tables coming out here. There's a reporting requirement in a column in a table. Again, you just simply couldn't get that out in that format. And this is a table that's in Word, and we're shredding it as a row in the output. So all of this stuff really, really helpful to kind of get going with. And I guess, Jeff, in your context, you would have taken this then and possibly shared it with colleagues and maybe added some columns over here, or what kind of stuff would you have done with this?
Yeah, so actually what we had done was used and built the dictionaries to include each bit of our portfolio, right? And so when we would shred through that document, each one of the requirements, and to the right where you have columns L through R, we would actually have each one of those products, and it would show which one of those requirements actually hit that piece of our product line. So then I could then take that to the security guys. I could give that to the contracts people. I could take, based on those different, we would shred it at the same time, against multiple dictionaries, so that we'd actually be able to shift the responsibility of looking at the requirements to the different teams.
Fantastic. So actually, in effect, your categories here, instead of security, you would have a product line, and you would have indicators within here that would suggest this product line, you're hitting requirements around that product line. Is that the kind of thing? And then output it into Excel.
Capabilities or functionality of that particular product. Yep,
brilliant.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so I suppose down here in the dictionaries area, you probably had specialized dictionaries. And by the way, for everybody who's looking, these are all, dictionaries in my environment. And just to give you an idea of the one that we just saw, even contract term stuff, This is where you can actually customize and edit these things and start to build patterns and wildcards and all kinds of stuff. So it's really, really intuitive and really easy. That's brilliant. Okay, let's move on. So we're talking about AI. I've just talked about deterministic software quite a bit. Let's switch gears and let's talk about the AI piece. And for that, I'm actually going to switch here and I'll go into a new, hopefully you can see Word again. I'm back in Word. Again, I'm not a Word sales guy, so please bear with me. So this is VT Writer, and this is an add-in into Word. And what this is basically doing is it's saying, okay, cool. Well, first of all, let's sign in. This is part of the VT Writer offering. And we've got an add-in into Word, which basically means I can actually use it side by side. But we also have an app that goes with this. So you can, if you're not a Word user, you don't have to necessarily use this all the time. But up here, and we find most of our customers, I think there's some exceptions, Jeff, that you've come across, but most of our customers are using Word. But there you go. So what are these things here? I mean, it looks a bit kind of, chatbotty in orientation, but in fact, this is a little bit different. These are prompt shortcuts that you can configure within the solution, which is really nice because one of the challenges with prompting is that not everybody is that skilled in prompts, and creating a good prompt is a bit of an art form. So this means we can share certain prompts. In this case, I'm creating a draft RFI response. And I've made this prompt, quote unquote, parameterized. It means that basically I can say, okay, let's say hypothetically we're doing something for the CDC. The RFI is called, what's it called? Let's call it AI automation. Again, I shouldn't really misspell things. And what's the purpose? We are going to optimize the procurement cycle. And I know, Jeff, you were mentioning prior to us jumping on live here that many of the government agencies are using AI to optimize and using non-AI technologies to optimize procurement cycles. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But I'm just kind of clicking on this. I'm now hitting the LLM, classic stuff. Again, to remind, that shortcut prompt might have been created by a colleague of mine. I get the benefit of their wisdom. I get to fill in the blanks. It's really, really helpful. And I get all these nice kind of, well, hopefully what is nice. Let's read it and make sure it's not hallucinating too much. Doesn't seem to be too bad if I skim it. But basically all of this is coming back from Gen AI land. This is a classic great use case for Gen AI to participate in. It's given me a pretty nice RFI response, if I may say so. And I'll just go ahead and insert that thing in. And even if you read it here, we are pleased to submit our response. Now, I hate the "we are pleased to submit" language, but that's just me. So just because it's LLM generated, it's a bit trite, it's a bit grovelly, but there we go. As experts in streamlining complex, okay, that's cool. And we can also, of course, point that at your proprietary content and have that influence the outcome as well. But what's nice about this is that now we can say, well, let's tighten this up. Let's score it. Now, I do need to read it, and it's come back with quite a bit of stuff here. It all looks reasonable to me, but now I'm into scoring mode, and scoring, just because something came back from the LLM doesn't necessarily mean it's fantastic. It's basically trained on the model. Underpinning this is the Llama 3 model, which is something came out from Meta about 2 months ago. Fantastically performant model, works really great. And just to emphasize, we as a company, Visible Thread, are LLM agnostic, meaning that we don't care what LLM you want to use, we can plug into anything. But this stuff here is basically deterministic, passive voice, long sentences, long words. And I can see there's a little simplify button here because the grade level here, which again is deterministically calculated, is 15. It's a little bit too high for my liking. So I'm going to ask it to simplify that piece of content. That again is using generative AI to help me get tighter content. So this kind of virtuous cycle, this creating, editing, updating, and then equipping this within our context of our SMEs, subject matter experts, really means that the work product coming from the SMEs is that much better. So that if I'm a proposal manager, I don't have to spend a lot of time editing and actually harmonizing the tone of voice. So let me stop sharing. I'm at great danger of, or actually I need to share again, my apologies. I'm at great danger of getting too much of a product pitch here. So I want to go back to something more interesting, which is the next part of my deck. So bear with me here a second.
Yeah, while you're bringing that up, I would
sure.
just add to the fact that one of the benefits of having the ability to have the retrieval augmented generation, the RAG portion of it, is
Mhm.
being able to put your content that you've used and built and reuse and want to reuse and has scored well over time to be able to pull that into each and every one of your proposals. So whether it's past performance area, whether it's like you were talking earlier, the small business plan or management plan that doesn't normally change, but you need to tweak with the parameterization. And it also, one of the things that I always ran into was the fact that the engineers, you want them, they're doing the proposal assistance as other duties is assigned, don't write well. They have a hard
Yep.
time with a blank screen, right? And so
Yeah.
being able to do that and use that capability allows them to get the content delivered in a timely manner and in a quality manner so that it's actually pulled through. So that being able to use the generative AI piece and then pulling your previously developed content is a great use of generative AI in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's kind of two elements of that. One, the kind of dipping into your proprietary content is so important. The other point to keep in mind, though, if your proprietary content is not well structured and well organized, you can often see a garbage in, garbage out scenario.
Yep.
So if the RAG, retrieval augmented generation portion of it is effectively being fed a lot of kind of duds, a lot of V1s, V5, not
Yep.
the final version, slightly iffy content, then you'll get a slightly iffy result as well. So you just need to there's a hygiene element here around your repository. And I think a lot of people don't quite realize that. I think Gen AI will provoke organizations to get their information architecture house in order, which basically means fundamentally well-structured, clearly delineated segments of information pertinent to a certain thing, whether you're sorting by folders in a SharePoint or libraries in a SharePoint around
Yep.
pursuits or particular customers, that will come to the fore, because otherwise it is a garbage in, garbage out thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And being able to plan ahead as you're getting to develop this portion of it, right? Having that
Right.
the gold standard or the the final version, but like you said, versus all the subsequent versions of it, and being able to pick and actually set that up, planning ahead for the ability to pull in the best content that you have.
Yeah, but I think most folks that I speak to, I've probably had about, I'd say, we're talking to most of our kind of strategic customers, or already had conversations. Most of them are acutely aware of that need, which is fantastic to see. And I think the hype cycle, which I'll talk about, and maybe I'll just get into that very quickly, this is bearing out right now. So in case anybody isn't familiar with Gartner and their hype cycles, they've been doing this stuff for donkey's years. But effectively, for every major section of technology, they do, quote unquote, this hype cycle thing. And there's various phases and kind of stages in this. The stage at the top here is effectively peak hype. So when you see the kind of top of this curve, that's the hypey phase. What they're saying, and this came out 17th of June, so literally three days ago or so, assuming today is the 20th. So 3 days ago, they issued this. They had one last year in late 2023 as well. So they're saying the generative AI bit, which is kind of indicated by that blue arrow, and I've kind of bolded it, we're now entering the trough of disillusionment phase. Now, that's not all doom and gloom stuff, but effectively, this is how every major technology innovation goes. We had it back in the internet days in the mid-90s with the first browsers. We had it in the mobile age, certainly 2007, 2008 with the iPhone. It took about 2 to 5 years for that to play out fully and really give us the experience that we're used to now and the actual, that kind of usability side of things. So typically what indicates trough of disillusionment stuff, and having lived through a whole bunch of these cycles, including crypto, you start to get naysayers. You start to get people being all negative about something. So it's almost, we're human beings. We're conditioned to sometimes doing this. We get a little bit, all excited by something, and then it disappoints in certain ways, and then we go all negative on it. I mean, stock cycles are a classic of this. I think I remember well when Amazon was like the darling, coming up to the dot-com boom, the dot-com bust hit, which was early 2000s, and all of a sudden nobody wanted to touch it. And now, of course, we all know where Amazon is. So it takes a long time for these things. It takes longer for it to play out than we expect, but it plays out in bigger ways typically than we expect. So this one is a 2 to 5 year horizon on the generative AI, but notice the fact that there's a whole bunch of other types of AI going on here. There's synthetic data, there's computer vision, autonomous vehicles. There's a crap load of AI types going on. And again, I will remind, we ourselves in Visible Thread have been using NLP and types of AI for the last 13 years. So it's just, you have to be a little bit more nuanced than just saying Gen AI is the silver bullet. And also more nuanced to say, well, actually, now that we're going into this possibly negative phase, which won't be borne out by NVIDIA stock price, by the way, it'll be borne out by applications that just don't do the job for you. NVIDIA will do fine, thank you very much. So that's the phase we're in. And this is what Gartner themselves say. So they're basically saying, look, there's been a massive investment in generative AI, huge, but it's yet to deliver its anticipated business value. I've included a link to this thing as well. So Darby, we can include that in our kind of follow-up as well. But basically, this is literally 3 days ago. What they're saying is it's past the peak of inflated expectations, which all sounds lofty. It's almost like Lord of the Rings stuff. But the hype continues. And I think we're all hearing the hype. And my mission personally, honestly, is to kind of untangle all this stuff, to demystify it, and make sure people understand that Gen AI is amazing for certain jobs, but it's not so good at other jobs. And what they're also saying here is that it's going to be some kind of derivative of a combination of technologies, other AI techniques. Now, this is an AI hype cycle. So in reality, it'll be a combination of deterministic and different types of AI, including Gen AI, in terms of products like what we do in Visible Thread. And then they're saying, basically, look, you need to have composite approaches. You have to have hybrid approaches. For us as vendors, we need to have hybrid approaches. For you, if you're building it yourself internally, you need to consider hybrid approaches. And in the end, if you are doing a build approach, you need to consider good old-fashioned hard problems like uptime, scalability, concurrency, qualities of service. How do we do backups? How do we make sure we never go down? All that kind of stuff, which is not easy and something that actually product vendors like us are kind of obsessed with. So there you go. Why don't we just open it up? I'm going to stop sharing on my side, and Jeff will take any questions. I think I've been rabbiting on enough at this stage.
Yeah, and I would bring up, I think we touched on earlier about the use of AI within proposal and procurement solicitation evaluations, right? Yep. One specifically, I was looking at the use case that GSA is implemented. They're in the implementation phase. And if you go to ai.gov, there's a whole list of the inventory of the different applications by departments. And GSA has built a tool that they call the Contract Acquisition Lifecycle Intelligence, and it's in the implementation phase. And they're using that to take vendors' proposals and perform an evaluation process on it. So the government's starting to get into it pretty well. And essentially they have a source selection module that passes all the documents to that. And they're looking for formatting compliance, forms validation, all the reps and certs compliance, and also requirements compliance. So they're putting it through and having the source selection teams look at the results of that. So having the tools that Visible Thread provides on the VT Writer and Docs, being able to accurately shred, understand, and check for compliance is going to be critical, especially when, as the government is starting to do that, to cut down on source selection time, source selection evaluation costs, that kind of thing. So I think it's important to know that, generative AI and also, the other parts of it are definitely going to be critical when it comes to that.
Yeah, to that end, we've certainly seen a number of RFIs, kind of source assault type approaches coming out of government agencies. There is definitely an appetite within government to adopt technology right now. And I think that's the case in commercial as well as government circles. The problem is that there's a bit of a disconnect, at least in my opinion, between what the C-suite wants and thinks they can get out of it and what's actually reality. And there's a bit of a kind of like they're freeing up budget, but they're robbing budget from different parts of the business. So net new budget is not happening. It's budget coming from one area going to another area. There's some interesting questions coming across here. Let's see if there's anything interesting, Jeff, on this one.
Sure.
They're all very interesting. Anything catches your fancy there? Do you have examples of prompts that can be used to have generative AI respond to proposal development content? So that one, I'm not sure if you've been using prompts consistently, but I certainly have come across. There's quite a few people floating around APMP circles who've been building prompts. There's one gentleman in India who's the former APMP head in India, who's a fantastic set of prompts. God, what is his name? I need to come back to Darby on that as to who his name is, but there's some great, for instance, create win themes, and actually evolving very clear prompts how you get to win themes is something that I've seen. The types of prompts, prompting is a bit of an art, and there are patterns around prompting. I know, again, a former co-presenter on one of these shows was Steve Skelton from Chickasaw. He's got a whole kind of tapestry or pattern of how you actually create prompts, and a lot of people are talking about prompts. I would say it's not a mystery. I would Google prompts. I would take some of the LinkedIn courses about how to prompt well. It starts with things like, telling the LLM who they are, what persona they're playing. You're a proposal professional. You're working on US government proposals. You need to create an outline for a task order or for a federal proposal of XYZ type. You can try things like, please keep your response to under 400 words. Whether the actual LLM will obey that and understand that and do it correctly, it'll approximately get that right, but it won't be deterministically right. But there are tricks about prompting, and actually setting up your context is one of the most important things. The second thing about prompts is that chaining the prompts is really important. So once you get something, you refine it. Sorry, Jeff, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say the other part of it too, from the proposal development side, I think in our prompting and kind of the experimenting with that is making sure you're using the customer's words, right? Yeah. Because that's going to be critical from a compliance point of view. And I liken it back to kind of when Google first came out. And trying to search, it's the same similar type of thing as you train your searches to become more honed in on that. And as you said, being able to refine them and save them and then keep using them. But each proposal may have key win themes that you're going to have to tweak a little bit, right? So just because it works on one, it may not work necessarily as well on the next one.
For sure. And I think that's where the value of a predefined set of prompts within whatever tool you're using. And that's why we built that capability within VT Writer, for instance, is to set up, configure a set of prompts, default prompts that have parameters in them. So then you can basically fill in the blanks type stuff. It just means that you get faster to a better quality outcome at that point, and leverage the most skilled prompters' abilities within your organization. A question here, which is interesting. Can you define shredding a document? Does this mean read and distill? I fall into that trap all the time. I presume that people know the words and language I use, and that's not a fair assumption. So shredding, by that what I mean is taking, let's say, a 150-page doc, the NASA soup document I showed, which is about 160 pages, decomposing it into all of its paragraphs or sentences, taking each one, putting it into a row in a spreadsheet, and then making sure that you're complying to that requirement in that spreadsheet. You can take that more steps, and now you get into, okay, who needs to review this? That could be a column. Are we compliant with this? So different, and ultimately your destination here is a compliance matrix. Now, typically in the world of federal proposals, and again, not knowing exactly the composition of the audience, you may be, if you're commercial, ignore what I'm about to say, but if you're in the federal space, this is true. Typically, there's different sections in the federal document. There's section C, which is what I need to build. There's section L, which are effectively the instructions for how you need to respond, which is really important. And section M is basically the factors by which you'll get evaluated. And typically most compliance matrices are kind of a combination of these three things. So you need to make sure that you address section L, how you need to respond, understand the factors by which the government will assess your response, and then make sure you're addressing all the requirements. So it's a human activity. And I don't buy the idea that technology, Visible Thread or any other technology, can do that automatically for you. We can help you shred and get the sections out, but we also need to allow your brain to make the appropriate alignments. And the reason for that is twofold. One, technology needs guidance in most cases. It doesn't do things by magic, even with Gen AI, believe it or not. And oftentimes technology solutions that suggest they do this force you to do a lot of upfront work, and it becomes very brittle. So it's really hard to kind of get the outcome that you expect, and it takes too much work. So that's what I meant by shredding.
The thing I
That
would
makes
add,
sense. Go for it, Jeff.
yeah, and I would add to that too. One of the things that when we first started using Visible Thread VT Docs, you know, either my capture managers or even some of the subject matter experts are like, well, um, I need to read it too, and I'm like, well, you're going to shred it. You're going to have all the requirements, but you're going to be able to read it. You're not when it's shredded, you don't lose any content whatsoever.
Correct.
It's just the way it's put out, and so you definitely, even using any sort of AI tool, you still have to go back and read it and still. So I like that part of the question of saying, hey, do I have to distill it too?
Yeah.
Because it may put it in nice lines and that, but you still need to understand what that requirement is.
Yeah,
So
and
you need to
absolutely.
read it as well.
I think this idea of magically creating anything in life is a fallacy.
Yeah.
All software does is
Yep.
makes you more efficient and maybe focuses your attention on certain areas which your human brain needs to assess and make a decent assessment on. And I've been around too long on failed projects to buy the line that there's magic here. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it drops it out, in seconds. Yeah, and it saves you a lot of time, but you still need to read it.
100%. Somebody's asking about what agency is starting to use AI for proposal evaluation, and what is the program AI tool called? You mentioned that. So on my side, we've seen RFIs for this, so I can't say the agencies that issue the RFI are currently using it. I don't think they are. Now they're looking at Gen AI as a solution base. Jeff, that link, that paper that you linked, it was GSA that put that out, or who was it?
So the federal government, U.S. federal government, went and built a inventory of application, what people are doing in AI, and the one specifically I looked at GSA because they're a big source of procurements, and they have something they're building called Cali.
Okay.
But it's if you go to ai.gov, you can get any one of those. And I sent Darby the link so she can provide that link to folks.
Fantastic. Let's see what else we have here. How do we purchase the deterministic software when working on proposals? Well, that's so. How do you purchase the software? You, not to be too smart, but you approach a vendor like us who uses deterministic software in conjunction with Gen AI, and we go through a usual sales cycle. But it's not. Go to visiblethread.com and ping us, and we're happy to kind of help you understand. The one thing we as a vendor, I suppose we have the luxury of being in this position. We're not a Gen AI first vendor. And that's a positive thing from our standpoint, because there's a lot of engineering spend and dollars that go into creating the right software for the right job to be done. If you're Gen AI first, you have to build kind of boring, hard stuff in the background to support enterprise type deployments. Things like credential management and workspace management and all the deterministic stuff that I've talked about. Acronym checks, compares, Excel compares, doc compares, all that kind of stuff, which we do in VT Docs. So it's kind of deterministic software. I mean, when you use Microsoft Word, the vast majority of Microsoft Word is deterministic. It's like that search example I showed earlier. That's all deterministic. So it's a fancy word, and I apologize that we have to force you guys to understand this word, but you almost have to understand that word to do an appropriate comparison of what Gen AI can do for you, or an appropriate evaluation, let's say. Jeff, anything else catching your fancy here on the list? And Jerry, kick in if we're overrunning. I'm not sure if we've time for more. But
yeah, I was just looking at the self-licking ice cream cone
yeah,
effect
what the heck
the
is
buyer
that?
is using. I'm trying to. That's not a favorite term of mine, but where the buyer is using Gen AI to produce a solicitation. So I guess you could say that the person releasing the solicitation is using Gen AI to produce it, right? So hopefully they've produced the requirements and reviewed it with the subject matter experts so they're accurate, and then to use a Gen AI tool to actually write your first draft response to send and certainly refine it and send that back. So I think that's, I think we covered that in the sense that, if the government's going to use Gen AI, or the buyer's going to use Gen AI to do it, hopefully what they provided to you is a well-structured requirement or solicitation document, because the worst thing you could have, and we've probably all experienced it, is when it's a poorly written solicitation document. You have to go back multiple times for questions and answers and multiple revisions by them submitting it. So hopefully the Gen I side will help them build better
Yeah.
solicitation documents that we can use. So I think that's kind of what we were getting at in that question.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I wonder if it's hinting. uh, uh, Tell me what you think about this, Jeff. The question, and the questioner is welcome to kind of follow up. I'm
Yeah.
fergal.mcgovern at visiblethread.com if you want to have a sidebar on this. But um, there is a perception out there, and I've heard this a number of times in different ways, and maybe this question is going towards that. There's a perception that if we use Gen AI to create our proposal magically, and the government uses Gen AI to assess the proposal magically, that everything will equalize and everything will be one homogeneous world of grayscale, right? That's I'm kind of feeling that.
Yeah,
There's
maybe
sometimes
that's it.
where I'm feeling that, but I'm not sure if this is what the questioner had in mind. And I think it's a load of bogus BS, to be honest. And the reason it is because think about Gen AI as a tool, right? If I submit a proposal that is automatically made up by a Gen AI and it's wrong and it doesn't represent my competency and my capability, I'm going to be shot. I'm going to be out of the water. I won't be able to deliver on it. And if I win the bloody proposal, I'm going to suffer a major loss on the contract.
Yep.
Like I will never do business with the government again. So I don't buy this thing that suddenly this Gen AI stuff on either side is doing magic. It's not suddenly making what used to be average proposals phenomenal.
Right.
If anything, it's just compounding the blandness of it all.
Yeah, I think part of the issue too is, if you look at the way the government procurement um, personnel, the career personnel, right? They've had just like a lot of other organizations, dwindling of people, the aging out, right? So the green, and they've got a lot more greening of the contracting professionals, and they've tried to do a lot more with less people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe from a perspective of being able to help develop the infrastructure or the framework for good solicitation. But again, it really takes them to go through it. You can generate something, but if you're not
Yep.
going to go through it, because I worked on one solicitation where there were 14 amendments, and I know, as from a bid and proposal cost value, it just shot through the roof, right? But it was something we obviously felt we were um, gonna win. This was prior to me being at VMware, but and we kept, and when I was on the integrator side, and we kept going after it, but it just time after time, it was like, why are we doing this? Because they obviously don't know what they want. So again, I think that's really the critical part of it. They can use the tool, but if they don't put out a good product on their side, even using a tool, because as we know,
Yeah.
I told you the story where a good friend of mine whose niece is a beauty queen, won a pageant, and he went in using Gen AI to say, "Hey, describe me," and it meshed all her information, talked about him being a beauty queen and all that kind of stuff, and it wasn't right. So
Right.
again, they've got to go through it. So I think, to your point, and the trough of disillusionment, right? Or in the hype cycle, we're in that with a lot of other technologies like 5G, right?
Yep.
So everybody was hyped. They build it out. It's not being really used. People use 4G. We're at Broadcom is in the communication side, right? So have seen that.
Sure. Sure.
But I think I think we're going to see that with the government building tools too for evaluation of
Right.
proposals. They're going to go one path, and it's not going to really be that the end all be all. So I think there's still going to be the man in the loop, if you will, right?
Yeah, and I think actually, literally, I won't name names on this one, but I was party and I'm party to a very major system integrator, or very major, let's say, government contractor, call them, not system integrator, who is doing a kind of a technology audit, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to market and they're basically saying, right, let's do a kitchen sink on this. Let's solicit everybody's view of what they would like to do. So they're slightly buying into the hype. So it's like, contracts, what would you like to do? Proposals, what would you like to do? Capture, what would you like to do? So it's a mishmash of kind of statements of intent or desire. And it's classic Big Bang stuff, which doesn't generally end in anything other than tears. And so I think there's a double negative.
Right.
But basically, as you look at, as anybody who's on this call, if you're looking at this stuff, try to find a digestible slice. It's the old phrase, how do you eat an elephant, and one bite at a time. So it's Not that probably eating elephants is to be endorsed these days, but anyway, there you go. You have to kind of decide what is the most pain in our business, where is it at, and can Gen AI offer some form of solution to it, or is it more quote unquote deterministic, or is it some mix of both? And I think that's what the government, I can think of multiple ways that the government should be evaluating vendors or, solicitations coming at them. You could certainly have part of the down selection process where you assess the readability of all the proposals, because if they're highly complex proposals, well, that probably indicates that they're not going to deliver in such an easy way or an easy to understand way. And it will probably lead to scope creep, because the complexity of the way they've answered it is indicative of, stuff going south, particularly in IT solutions. And trust me, I've been involved in early parts of my career with enough failures on the IT side. So anyway, I suppose our message fundamentally is nothing has changed and everything has changed. Gen AI is a part of the solution stack, but the fundamental issue is a human issue. How do we actually make our lives as human beings more efficient and more effective and a better quality outcome? And that's the most actually business optimization.
Yep.
Is there time for anything? Is there anything else that catches your fancy on the questions?
I think this question here about whether if you can evaluate it using Gen AI, right? The RFP. I think this is, and then can the clients figure out if it was AI based in response, right?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think I know my wife's a teacher, and in the schools they're using some tools to detect whether it's generated for AI, right?
Right.
What's your thought on the?
Yeah, I think there's a long old history on this. People on this call may be familiar with a company called Grammarly, really good company. They actually originated from the academic sector, where their original tools back probably the guts of 20 years ago at this stage, 15, 20 years ago, were plagiarism detectors, which again, from your wife's standpoint, would be something that, education is very interested in. Technically, and this is not necessarily, I'm expressing a view here, so please take your own advice and guidance on this. Technically, unless you're really dumb, there's no way to detect AI-generated content. So what do I mean by unless you're really dumb? If you actually put in one prompt and take the entire generated content and submit that, that's been really dumb, right? So you could think there might be some way of inferring that. But it's a bit like if I ask you to do a very long, complicated sum in math, I really don't care whether you use a pen and paper or use a calculator, as long as you get me an answer that's the correct answer. And this is always my argument about Gen AI or not Gen AI. Technically, when you think about what Gen AI does, again, it's the dog chased the X. How can you possibly say, if I use Gen AI to complete that sentence, that was Gen AI or that was me? It's legitimate English words, one word following the other. There was a mythical thing last year. The executive order came out last October, November, where Biden was suggesting in that you could somehow watermark AI generated content. That is generally a fallacy. Right. It's just not technically possible. In certain scenarios, it is, but it has to be a kind of a black box scenario, and it has to be one thing. But if we're all using AI, whether we know it or not. Yep. That autocomplete stuff in Word, that's a different type of AI. That's been around before ChatGPT. That's AI. Grammarly's been using it a long time. We've been using it a long time. So this idea that you can somehow test for it is a nebulous concept. It's really not practical or technically enforceable. I do know for a fact on NASA Soup, which is the one that I was referring to, the massive 60 billion IDIQ, they do say, tell us if you use AI. And I think your best policy there is say, yes, we use AI in what context? To help tighten up content or to help edit content. But the vast majority of the content is, handwritten. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. I think it's a silly question, to be honest, because who cares?
Yeah, it's kind of like when they ask for the names of people that responded to their proposal. It's like at the end of the day, what's from your company?
The other question they were asking in that particular one was list all your consultants who helped build the proposal. I mean, who cares? But the worry is legitimate. I mean, the worry is that you won't be able to fulfill, and the contract and it's a risk factor. I get that,
Right.
but it's kind of really who cares time. I mean, that would suggest to me that the actual government agency is not doing a great job of vetting the actual company as a whole,
Yep.
in a holistic
Absolutely.
way. But that's a different argument. Great. Listen, I think we've reached the end of our time, and really appreciate everybody's attention. I hope you found it useful. As I say, we try not to be too product pushy on this stuff, but look, we can't help it. Show a little bit about our wares. But Jeff, really appreciate your time, and I'll hand it back to Darby.
Yep. Thanks for the opportunity.
No worries.
Yes, thank you both to Fergal and Jeff for sharing your knowledge and insight with all of us today. We really appreciate your time. That was super informative. And yeah, a reminder that by registering for this webinar, you will receive a post-webinar email, which will include our webinar feedback survey, today's session slides, and a few resources that were mentioned in the presentation that I will forward along. To all of our attendees, the recording of this webinar will be available on APMP TV shortly. Again, thank you to Jeff and Fergal, and thank you to everyone for joining. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep. Bye.